Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Pine-Richland Planning Meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Ms. Williams.
Mr. Lyons?
Here.
Mrs. Misbach? Here. Mr. Kashani?
Here.
Dr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. DiTullio?
Here.
Dr. Mihalik?
Here.
Dr. Meyer?
Here.
Mr. Moy?
Here.
Mrs. Swope?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. As we enter our second month of virtual, hybrid, and in-classroom instruction, I wanted to pause, really, for the board and for all of us in the community and share a few words. First, I want to thank you, especially my fellow board members, for your engagement, the time that you have spent, your passion for education and for this community. I really want to stop and thank you. It's been a trying year, and you guys have really shown how much you love the school district and how hard you're willing to work for it. So I really appreciate that. I want to thank the administration, everyone here, of course, but every principal and vice principal in this district who has spent countless hours answering questions, resolving issues, scheduling questions. There's a million small details that have gone into your child's program that need to be addressed and are being addressed. Our teachers, paras, staff who demonstrated patience and resilience throughout this, and of course our students and parents who have persevered throughout with us. And we thank you all for joining us on this. We are in this together. So I want to thank the community as well. I want to thank you for your patience, for your resilience. I especially want to thank those who have reached out to us in recognition of how hard our time has been in navigating the challenges that the pandemic has provided to us. And we hear your criticisms as well. We understand those. I want all of us to remember, of course, that those come from the heart also. But please know that we share your values. We share your passion for education, for student well-being, both their academic as well as their physical, emotional well-being. And we share your desire for normalcy. It doesn't mean we can make it happen, but we understand that desire and we share it. We ask that you give us that respect back. We are not I can't think of a government board that is more of this community. We are parents, we are coaches, we're volunteers. We are of Pine-Richland as much as anybody else could be. And so we will navigate these things together and be a stronger community for it. Thank you for allowing me to make that statement. Before we move into the regular agenda, I also wanted to take a moment of silence to recognize the passing of Mr. Robert McDonough. Mr. McDonough served as a teacher for 32 years in Pine-Richland School District. In addition to his many academic accomplishments, he coached to, I believe, 5 Whipple championships and the district's first PIA championship in cross country. Tremendous accomplishment is being recognized by the Pine-Richland Athletic Hall of Fame, where he is being inducted. Please take a moment of silence in recognition of his life. Thank you. And now, as has been our custom lately, we will have a return to school update prior to the first recognition of visitors. Dr. Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lyons. Mr. Stoviner, if you could pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, so we're starting our 6th week of school. I switched the title of this one from Return to School Update to Educational Model Update. And that may seem like a small change, but it's an important one, I think, as we understand where we are, where we've been, and where we're going next. So this is around the educational model currently in place at Pine-Richland and all of the factors that influenced why this is the model, how it's designed, what we're monitoring in order to make decisions and recommendations, and how we move forward. Next slide, please. So tomorrow morning, an e-blast will go out to our community, and that e-blast will be very brief, but it'll have a link to tonight's presentation. So we're recording this as we have done. This information will be posted on the district's COVID-19 website, and it really has a lot of critical information. So a lot of families may be asking, you know, how, why, what are you looking at, what's guiding decisions? All of that information is contained within this presentation. And if we were to go all the way back to the end of July, you could devote a lot of time and just listen through each step of this process. But I should cover most of those main points here tonight. So you see the points of discussion. Next slide, please. So similar to what Mr. Lyon shared, the first thing I would say here is a thank you. You know, we have 4,600 students. We have thousands and thousands of families. And I thought a slide around community building and empathy was appropriate. This is not something that we've talked about. We've talked about patience and flexibility, but not so much community building and empathy. And this is taken from an exercise that we've done at board and administrative workshops that one of our board members identified. And if you look on the left on this slide, it says, you know, in this challenging time, empathy-based questions may be helpful because it allows us to put ourselves in the chair or in the shoes or perspective of someone else. So what does that person see that I don't see? What do they want that I may not want? What do they believe that I may not believe? And what do they care about that I may not care about in the same way? So these are questions. And then on the right, I just listed a few examples of the different perspectives, the reality of what a community is, even a community with shared values and the importance of education. It is almost infinite, the number of differing perspectives and the ability to adjust or adapt in the face of what we've been dealing with since March of 2020. So students, you know, what is the student's perspective? What does that kindergarten student see that I may not see, right? Or what does the parent see if I'm a staff member? What does the parent see that I don't see? Because we know that there's a big difference between perhaps parents who their employment hasn't been impacted by COVID-19. Maybe they have a single child that's older and more independent in their learning. That experience is grossly different than maybe a family that has 4 kids, an infant, a 3-year-old, a kindergarten student, a 3rd grader, and they're trying to balance the situation. And when we do something for a few days or for a week or for a month, you're able to sort of get your head around that and work through it. The challenge of what we face is how long do we need to sustain that? When is the time? And these are the questions that we're getting. When can we get back to normal? And so on the right side of this, I'll use an example. If I'm a teacher and I want to practice an empathy exercise, I might do this. What does Mr. Stobener, our Director of Technology, see that I don't see? And he could ask the same question. What does a teacher see that he doesn't see? But teachers want technology to work. So does everybody else. There is not a single person who doesn't want the technology to work. But in his role as Director of Technology, if we engage in that empathy exercise, what does he see that I don't see? What could be an ideal solution for one person may be less than ideal for another. You know, we have research about young children and COVID-19 that has continued to evolve. Well, what about the teacher who's in a room, and if we cannot provide the physical distancing, what does that mean in order to provide that learning experience for children? So on the right side of this, you know, you could play this empathy exercise all day long as we think about the various roles. And as I think about governance and leadership, our responsibility as we think about the mission, vision, values of the district, our responsibility is to see all of those perspectives. There are very few people that have the responsibility to try to empathize with each and every one of those. And that's the challenge and opportunity and responsibility that comes with leadership and comes with governance. And I'm proud to do that here at Pine-Richland because I know the diligence and effort with which the board is supportive and working with administration to understand that with input from staff and parents. And again, ideal solution for one may not be one for another. But the question of what and why is covered in the upcoming slides. Next slide, Sean. So you've seen this before, but it's a little different. And the deeper this gets embedded, the better. So the word that's been added now is implement. So we researched, we got input from families, we planned, and then we implemented. We're in our 6th week. Every week that we've implemented, we've had experiences. We've taken those experiences. We've taken the new research. We've taken the additional input. We replan, we revise, and then we keep on moving around this process. You see that it's built on guidance from health agencies, and it's also built on the Pine-Richland Healthcare Leadership Council. That group of 43, which I'll touch on later, has been incredible in providing community-based experts to help us filter and understand all of this information in order to continue to make good decisions on behalf of our students and families. Next slide. This slide is a little different. If you pay close attention, you'll see the green H starburst is bigger. It's bigger because we have experienced now, knock on wood, 5+ weeks of success in implementing the hybrid model to such a degree that we feel even more confident in the hybrid. And the virtual cloud, yellow V, is a little bit smaller. It's still there. We feel reassured that if needed, we can move in that direction. But because of the design of our hybrid, we have more confidence that that hybrid can provide continuity of learning for our students and families. The hybrid is not easy. It is not easy on staff. It is not easy on families who would prefer to have children in school 5 days a week. It's not easy, but we feel confident in its design and what it's allowing us to do for children's and continuity of learning. Next slide. So again, very small change here. That green starburst H was shifted just a couple of hairs to the left. So you'll see that in the last parent selection survey. Model didn't change, but you'll see some movement in where in-person interest is based on the success that we've had thus far. And so at the bottom of this slide, it describes that, but it also indicates it's reassuring to know that we're ready in the event we would need to shift. And so that's positive. Next slide. So even though we've been reviewing these measures for a period of time, it's tough. So if we use our empathy-based exercises, and I'm a parent, one of the greatest strengths at Pine-Richland is communication. One of the biggest challenges is receiving all of that communication and knowing what it means and keeping it clear. It's tough to do. And so in this slide, we see the conditions by which an educational model would be determined. So when people in the community are saying, what are you looking at? What measures? What metrics? How are you determining the educational program? This serves as a foundation. You see in the title, Pennsylvania Department of Ed, Pennsylvania Department of Health. Those are the two agencies that came together to provide this framework for schools in Pennsylvania to consider. So these two measures together talk about the amount of virus that's in the community. So incidence rate per 100,000, and then the positivity percentage of the PCR tests. And you notice that incidence rate is in yellow. It's in yellow to signify the moderate range. You'll see that when we move on in a second. And the positivity mostly is in green, and anything less than 5. Low transmission equals green. equals less than 10 in the incidence rate and less than 5% positivity. So these are, what's new on this slide is the red box that says guidelines, not magic numbers. So again, there's no magic numbers, whether it's capacity that we're talking about later or it's these measures. There's nothing magical, for example, about 10.1 is an incidence rate and 9.9. But it's important to understand the general direction and what these conditions mean. They're reported on a weekly basis on the PA COVID Early Warning Dashboard site. And so you can search by county, and these are Allegheny County measures based on what's happening here. Next slide. So in more detail, why a hybrid? And as we've mentioned in the past, not all hybrid approaches are the same. So the Pine-Richland hybrid has very specific elements in the design of the instructional model, specific uses of technology, specific classroom setups, all to meet the health requirements that we believe are best for students and staff and continuity. So on the left side of this slide, what we see are those same colors that I talked about before. If we look in the low transmission, you see a green star in less than 5. That's been our positivity for about the last 7 weeks or so, less than 5%. But in the moderate range, where the yellow star is, we see between 10 and less than 100 for incidence rate. So again, on the last slide, we saw where have we been each week in this lagging measure. And right now, we have 1 in each of those. But you need both in low in order to meet those criteria. So if we follow that over a little bit, we see blended learning model or full remote learning model. Those are the recommended educational program options for school districts based upon the conditions as they currently are. And so for Pine-Richland, again, we would use the word hybrid learning model, and that means specific things for us. But it's that dark green question in the middle of the slide that is the one that we're hearing asked most often. When can we shift further left on, now they don't say further left on the continuum, but what they say, when can we shift to 5-day in-person option for most students? I say most students because I feel 100% confident that we will have some families who would like to stay in a virtual learning environment all year. I believe that they will want to be in that 100% virtual environment through the remainder of the 2021 school year. Some families, some students. But there are many, most, the majority, where if conditions allow it, they would prefer to have 5-day in person. So when? On the right side, these are our words, so nothing magical here, but the answer is really when it's safe and sustainable. So we've been experiencing success because of a thoughtful, deliberate, incremental approach to what education looks like, to what athletics and activities look like, everything that we've been doing. So it's safe and sustainable when the conditions approximate some of the low transmission, cases remain rare, and we have a longer sample size to understand what that means and looks like. So we're happy that we're in week 6 started, and we've experienced what we have in terms of cases. And I'll talk about that specifically in an upcoming slide. But the last piece there of moving towards 5-day in-person is when physical distancing within the model can be less than 6 feet. So there is a point where increasing the number of students here every day can only be accomplished by decreasing the distance between students in the schools. And that means something. And so again, we'll talk about that. But that would be sort of the equation to answer the question, when can we shift? Next slide. There's a report by a third party, Mathematica, that is available via the link, so it'll be there and on the resource page for families. But this was commissioned by the Department of Ed. The report studies various models and approaches to the instructional day setting during COVID-19. And it is outstanding. For those who really want to dig into the report. So parents, if you're interested, read it. It is worthwhile. The high-level key findings are incredibly relevant for Pine-Richland. So when I built this slide, I started to bold some parts of the key findings and stopped because I was bolding each word in the key findings. So masks are critical. Masks are what help us have the confidence with physical distancing and hand sanitizing to have such success as we've experienced in the first 5.5 weeks here. Again, infection rates in elementary schools likely to be lower than secondary schools in the same model. We have different developmental models in our district, and that makes sense relative to the information you see in there. It's the third bullet that is just so important. Hybrid approaches where smaller groups wear masks and attend in person part-time dramatically reduce the total number of likely infections in the school. The model suggests that under the hybrid approach, as we have it at Pine-Richland, with precautions, knowing that students and staff may be walking through the door asymptomatic but positive for COVID every day, with the design that we have, the likelihood of passing those infections within the school setting are incredibly low. That is an important key finding for us. And the last bullet talks a bit about the idea that if you push too fast, you get into other places with transmission that might lead to periods of closure. And periods of closure haven't shown to be real effective through the Mathematica analysis. And then ultimately is disruptive. So, this idea of slow, deliberate, incremental, while it may not be ideal for some, is a way of demonstrating success, building continuity, and gradually improving as we monitor the conditions. So again, it all works together, but excellent report, and it's available for anyone. It's posted, it's linked in a number of ways, and it'll be linked on Pine-Richland's site as well. Next slide. So over the last month or so, the question of cases has emerged, right? So we have conditions, how much virus is in the community. Then we have cases. So a confirmed case or a probable case. A probable case or a presumptive case is a case assumed to be and is treated as if it's a confirmed case. But we had some initial indication from PDE and the Department of Health that if you get 2 to 4 students or staff in the same building, maybe that'll lead to a period of closure. Or if you get X number of students or staff in a building or across the district, it might lead to a longer closure. The exciting part of where we are is the idea that that evolves. So it's back to the iterative thing. What they're finding is, Mathematica reports a good example, but Allegheny County's interpretation has shifted. I'm on a call with representatives of Allegheny County Health Department and the Allegheny Intermediate Unit superintendents, 42 superintendents, every week. And every week we're looking at conditions and cases and talking about with the county health department. And they are feeling better about understanding the specifics of the hybrid models in the schools. And for example, the Pine-Richland specific hybrid model gives them a lot of confidence that even if we were to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cases, there is a strong likelihood that we would not need to close a school for a period of time. And again, that's based on the design of our hybrid model. So again, not magic numbers. So even though these numbers are here on the slide, discernment, clear communication with the health department officials about how you're set up and who's where, contact tracing the questions, are all a part of determining what would happen. So unless there were what I'll say is, and again, this is a more significant outbreak or a serious cluster of a lot of cases, there is a stronger likelihood that we would not need to close and go to the full virtual setup. That's why at the beginning of the presentation, the green starburst was bigger and the yellow V was a little bit smaller. Next slide. So in the public health forecast, and again, this is important for us to understand. So the challenge, I think, of early success is the desire to put the pedal down a little bit more. And we agree that making reasoned decisions and incremental steps is important, but to what degree? And so I've listed here by name and organization some of the national directors who forecast some concern with the impact of seasonal flu and the reality that colder temperatures bring more people inside, and this is a respiratory and other kind of transmission. This happens this is normal. This is what happens. The sub-bullet, which I think is interesting and came out of discussion at our last Healthcare Leadership Council meeting, is that the mitigation efforts that are in place. So the fact that we have hybrid, the fact that we have physical distancing, the fact that people are wearing masks, washing their hands, all of those things will protect us better than ever before relative to seasonal flu. So, will it get worse? Will it stay about the same? If it stays the same, part of the reason the experts suggest, including ours, is because of these mitigation efforts. So that's important. Again, the vaccine information has appeared to say largely the same, which is to suggest that if a proven effective vaccine becomes available, scaling that to widespread distribution will take time, and no one can put an exact, when on that, although it appears a little bit longer, not shorter, as part of that. And again, a bolded reminder, as we're talking about the instructional model, when schools are in their, quote, traditional, end quote, design, they're dense, they're highly populated. There's tons of kids in hallway movement. There's tons of kids in a cafeteria setting. There's kids closely arranged within a classroom. So right now, we have seen success, and that success is tied to good decisions and a model that promotes the kind of continuity we want. Next slide. Okay, so we said in early August, we knew we're in a different place than we were in early August. We know a lot more, we've implemented a lot more. I mean, it would be a wonderful world if we could have seen into the future with clarity, but we didn't know exactly where we would be. So at the beginning of August, knowing everything that we knew and had worked to understand, we asked parents finally to make a selection. So you see the options there, K-3, 4-6, 7 through 12. And in black, you see the percentage that selected that particular option. So looking at the K-3 row, in the August 1 timeline survey, 59% selected 5-day. Remember, our action was to hire 14 short-term subs to expand our workforce at the K-3 level in order to maintain physical distancing within that environment. We had 17% alternating in-person and virtual, and then 24.2% of K-3 were at home. We said it doesn't feel fair to pick an arbitrary length of time like 9 weeks when that selection was being made. Parents were anxious, none of us knew what to expect when we returned to school. High levels of anxiety amongst staff, amongst families, amongst students, but these were the numbers. We said we'll ask you again. And so we asked again in our 10-1 survey, and at the K-3 level, you can see what is the sort of the desire for increased in-person instruction. So our full virtual at home went from 24 to 20.6. You can see our alternating day dropped to 4.5, and we're up about 16% of those who would like 5-day in-person. So that's the selection that we said we would provide an opportunity. Probably the biggest area of complaint, frustration, concern was from parents in grades 4 to 12 who wanted to have a 5-day selection option now. And we did not put that on the selection survey. The reason we did not put that on there, we know there are those who are interested in that right now. It's not a question of not knowing. It's a question of understanding what the conditions tell us at this time, what the model design needs to be, and asking people to make choices within that model design so that we can continue the successful educational program. But even, again, at 4 to 6, you see a slight increase in in-person, and at 7 to 12, you see the same thing. And so a couple of points here. These are what I'll call close numbers, not perfect numbers, but they paint the picture. There's some moving parts in this. For clarity, if you look in the 5-day in-person, we do have some students at grades 4 through 12 who are receiving more intensive, students in a special education program receiving more intensive Tier 3 supports who are here 5-day. For the purpose of this slide, we put those students in the middle column because we didn't want there to be confusion of parents saying, hey, I didn't think that was an option. So again, we do have a small percentage of students at 4 through 12 who receive intensive interventions who are here 5 days a week. Okay, next slide. So what are we doing now? And if you look behind the work in progress bar, there's real language there, so that tells you what we're doing. So K to 3, you looked at the percentages, we have more students who want to be in in-person instruction, 5 days or alternating day. So what we're doing right now, building by building, classroom by classroom, student roster list by student roster list, is our principals are working with our team to say, is there capacity in that room? If there are 17 desks that can fit in a classroom 6 feet apart to meet our physical distancing requirements, and only 15 of those desks are being used by students in the everyday or alternate day, then we have a capacity, extra capacity, to handle 2 more students in that environment and still meet the precautions of our approach. But in another room, we might not have those 2 capacities. So who are the students on the roster? What does that look like? And how can we work through this? So it's going to be different, Hance by Wexford by Richland. It will be flexible. It will be collaborative. It will require us to cooperate and collaborate and think about things differently. But I am confident we will come up with creative solutions that do not sacrifice health and safety, but do meet the hopes and desires of selection by parents. So we're working through that. Grades 4 through 6 and 7 through 12, again, slightly different based upon our design. So at 4 to 6, we have more capacity, and we believe we'll be able to accommodate relatively simply. It's the 1,000 other parts of what a master schedule looks like in a school. How are all the interventions and special area class? There's a lot of things beyond the home room. And so understanding the implications is what they'll be working on at Eden Hall. And then at 7 through 12, it's really almost student by student or team by team. So it's really looking at the students. And when you saw the percentage slide, we're talking about smaller numbers of students shifting from full virtual to the alternating day, and we feel pretty confident we're going to be able to address that. The when, we're actively working on it. And so the answer to when may in fact be different at different classes and grade levels. It's going to be as soon as possible with the confidence. We said before, this is not like flipping a switch. You can't, there's a lot of things that happen with staff and schedules and supports and communication, and so it's going to take us a little time to be confident. We're not going to hold everybody until we figure every last detail out. We can begin to move certain levels, and we'll be managing and communicating that through our schools. Next slide. Okay, so confirmed cases and the PRSD model. So the bolded area, health office monitoring, there is tons of daily work going on behind the scenes. So we have symptoms lists that our nurses use as part of our screening protocol when students aren't feeling well. And so ideally, if a student is symptomatic, they're not coming to school. But what's happening, even if a student is staying home, mom and dad are calling the school, talking to the nurse, and sharing what's going on. The level of communication between home and school around student health is stunning. The level of collaboration between our school nurses regarding families is incredible. the level of coordination and follow-up when a student may need, or staff member may need to be tested for COVID, and how do we track and monitor and share and understand that in order to follow up is really remarkable. So we've shared thank yous for our school nurse department chair, Mrs. Sean Bachler, but it's every single nurse is really doing some stunning work. Dr. Justice leads that group and helps facilitate that work, coordination with Allegheny County. And again, the idea there is the hybrid is built with the understanding that we're going to have asymptomatic students walking through the door every day, or staff members, because that's the nature of this, this illness. On the right side, it's worth stating again, quarantine, and we have had a number of people quarantined since the start of the year. Quarantine happens. It will continue to happen. It is a precaution. It is something that happens for healthy individuals who may have been exposed as a close contact to remove themselves for a period of time, usually around 14 days, to see if any symptoms begin to emerge. Symptoms can emerge within a couple of days, or they cannot emerge for 10 days or 12 days. And so that period of quarantine is a window that gives confidence to know whether somebody is going to become symptomatic or not. So again, quarantine important. Next slide. So cases and communication. In the month of September at Pine-Richland School District, we had 2 cases. One was confirmed, one was probable, but it was handled as confirmed. So that's what we had. So for the question, how many cases have you had at Pine-Richland? In the month of September, we have had 2. And that 2 is reflective of students and staff combined. We're not going to focus on any one. That is a number 2. We've shared this information. There's a desire for information and communication. There's even an allegation that failing to provide certain information is a lack of transparency. That is, people are entitled to whatever opinion they have. We do not view it as a lack of transparency at all. At all. We view it as trying to balance public awareness with individual privacy rights. Our approach to communication at this time is built on the strength of our hybrid model. So our hybrid model embeds the big 3. If there is anybody who needs to be informed that they may have been a close contact of someone who is confirmed or probable, we're working with the Allegheny County Health Department, and we're communicating directly and specifically with those who may need to quarantine. Thus far, that has been an extremely small number. We've had a lot of quarantine, but a more likely scenario is that someone in the home, perhaps a parent, is COVID positive. If we have a parent who's COVID positive, then every member of that family generally is quarantined. So if there's a parent, let's say a dad is COVID positive, and there's a mom in the house and there's 3 kids that are Pine-Richland students, all 3 of those Pine-Richland students would be quarantined. Being quarantined doesn't mean you're COVID positive. It means you are a close contact. You may have been exposed, and so you are held at home for a period of 14 days to see if symptoms emerge. So again, this is, I don't like to say no news is good news, but when it comes to communicating around privacy and balancing that, in this case, no news means there's nothing to do differently other than wear your face covering, wash your hands, keep the physical distancing. Allegheny County Health Department has shared that in some cases in Allegheny County, not in Pine-Richland, but in the county, where there is transmission, one of the more challenging areas is in a faculty lunchroom. So a faculty lunchroom where staff members may need to, they need to eat, but they need to sort of relax a little bit. That's an example of an area that would be of concern. But again, the Pine-Richland hybrid is in good shape. So that last bullet, there are some that, and I don't know how many, but there are some who would like to have something like a COVID tracker. A COVID tracker is a publicly facing scoreboard, for lack of a better description. If you have a case, then a number goes up on the board. And if you have another case, another number goes up on the board. There are some potential benefits of a COVID tracker, and there are a number of concerns tied to a COVID tracker, particularly in a community and school district like Pine-Richland of our size. So why would it be beneficial? It would be beneficial at a school level if there was a magic number. So if 4 was the magic number of cases within a certain time period, then having a public-facing number would allow families to understand we're close to a period of school closure. But everything we've learned about the hybrid model and the conditions in place and how mitigation or quarantine is handled in a much more targeted fashion, that is not something that leads to any action here. And the concerns are, and these are significant, real concerns, if we were to communicate at a building level, the very first question when a number goes up is, who is it? Is it a staff member or is it a student? Whose car is not in the parking lot today? Who's not in school today who should be in school? And what ends up happening is it shines a bright light and further enhances this concern and stigma around those who may be positive. That's a concern, because if there's a stigma around something like COVID-19, it reduces the likelihood that someone's going to be honest and share their symptoms or or what's going on at home, because people do not want to be that person or that thing that caused something to get canceled or closed or whatever, and it is a significant concern. But more importantly is we have no action to take. So if we had that tracker, it doesn't change our behavior. It doesn't require us to do anything different. And I'm not in support of that. I wanted to mention it here because it's a question that emerges, but from our perspective, the concerns outweigh the benefits, and just because a place chooses to do this doesn't mean it might be right for that community, but we don't believe it's right for our community at this time, but certainly would welcome any questions about that. Next slide. Huge thank you again. The fact that our families are willing to help support other families by driving kids to school has been a huge benefit. I asked Mrs. Charney and Mrs. McAndrew to estimate the number of kids on the bus at the various levels. So what we see here is at this point, at the first couple of days, it was pretty empty. It has gradually increased, and at the K to 3 level, we see about, on average, 15 to 22. 4 to 6, 10 to 12, grades 7 to 12, 8 to 16. On a 77 passenger bus, we have 25 unique seats. So as an arbitrary number, 25 is sort of where we are. We'd like to keep it about 25. That gets every student their own seat. If we have siblings, that's different. We can put siblings in the same seat because they're living together. But windows down, hand sanitizer, the whole bit. The hardest thing for us to figure out is how to communicate with our families, particularly at Eden Hall through the high school, that here's what we're communicating. We have more room, so we want to get more kids riding the bus, grades 4 through 12. But we don't want to go from too few to too many. And that's a next to impossible thing to try to facilitate. So the reason for this slide is like a soft nudge to begin to creep in the direction of increasing ridership, which will be nice and easier for families. We can do so safely. And then it ultimately also reduces the traffic and campus activity that has to happen. So I don't know how to do this any better than to say 4 through 12, we want a gentle nudge in the direction of increasing ridership. And then if you put your child on the bus one day, when they come home, say, how was it? How many were on the bus? Is everything okay? And do it again tomorrow, and hopefully we'll settle out at a place that's the right balance. Okay, next slide. I'll focus on the final 3 bullets where you have an athletic and activities update coming in a different item. Gathering limits have been in the news, in the paper, on social media, in the court system. There's almost no place that gathering limits haven't been discussed in some way over the last month. Guidelines, not magic numbers. We'll get an update on that, but again, we're aware of it. The first bullets on this slide are sort of grounded in our belief system, which was that as a part of our incremental approach, because of how important it is for students' physical, social, and emotional well-being, we wanted to try to move in the direction of having sports and activities, working through the phases, 1, 2, 3, increasing from high school to middle school. And we have been able to manage that as of today, October 5th. We've been able to manage that in a healthy way. And we feel really good about that. It feels really good to have a couple of months of athletics and activities under our belt. It feels really good to be in our 6th week of the hybrid model and have been able to do so with a degree of continuity. Spectators are the piece of that. It is disappointing when a concerned member of our community or parent makes a claim that either I don't care about their child, or that Mr. Simmons doesn't understand or care about, or that Dr. Pasquinelli or Mr. Bowman or someone else. It's disappointing. For me, it's 25 years of student-centered focus as an educational leader at all levels of an organization. The same is true of the others that are in positions of responsibility. We are trying to lead to the best of our ability in a global pandemic. Our top priority is to allow the event itself to happen safely. When gathering limits are in place, or spectators are being managed in a certain way, or the event has to be managed. Again, having an opinion is one thing. Managing an event with 1,200 people is something else. Managing an event with thousands and thousands of people is something else entirely. It is not, our action is not because we do not value each and every stakeholder in our community. We 100% do. It's because we're trying to balance competing tensions in a global pandemic that allows us to engage in those activities without putting people at risk. There are thousands of opinions. That's the part of the reason I put the community building and empathy exercises at the beginning. And it's really about trying to find that best fit. We'll be ready for different things, and so Mr. Simmons and Dr. Pasquinelli will talk through that in the next part. But I wanted to mention that because we hear you when you're concerned or dissatisfied with our approach. We don't even need to hear it for you to know that we're thinking about it, and we want to find ways to be successful. We will continue to advocate for our marching band to find ways to perform, or other groups to find ways. It is heartbreaking, and at the same time, we're creative and focused on children to try to find ways to do that. The last bullet, outside groups and facility use, we continue at this point to not permit outside groups and or outside party use of facilities. We know that is frustrating. We know there are groups that are struggling to find a way to engage kids because they don't have access to our facilities. We understand. And we're trying to balance that within our overall approach to the district. And it's frustrating, we get that, but we are, if people think that we don't feel that or understand that or don't reflect on that, we do, and I wanted to say that clearly. Next slide. It is common to want to compare. So we live in a certain place. And so if we were to spiral ourselves around the clock, we could start at Mars and move to Butler and South Butler and Deer Lakes and Hampton and Shaler and North Allegheny and Seneca Valley and Quaker, and you go around the horn. Well, how come that, whatever the questions are. We understand what's happening in different places. You heard in tonight's presentation, again, the data, measures, and metrics by which we are making recommendations. I cannot speak to how other districts approach this. I mean, I understand how they do, but I'm not going to try to make decisions about it. That's their responsibility. Our responsibility is to be as clear and deliberate and informed as we possibly can to bring you our very best thinking. Even our hybrid is different. And if you recall, we had some discussions here about, hey, did you think about an AA and then an everybody virtual and then a BB? Well, the alternating day approach that we recommended provides 10% more instruction in person than the AA off BB approach. No one talks about that. It also provides a rhythm to school attendance for children that keeps them connected to their teacher and to what's happening in that course, as opposed to 2 days in person and then 5 days virtual. So there are disadvantages, as we talked about, especially with childcare. When you have a childcare need in your family and you have an alternating day and not a fixed schedule, that's a hardship. And we are thankful for those that are working through that hardship at home in order to try to find a solution that works the best for the district. So again, we appreciate so much. And I think the hardest part about where we are, even though we've had an incredibly successful beginning, is it's exhausting. It's that when is this going to end kind of feeling. Throw your hands up in the air and get frustrated. And we just want to continue to be thoughtful, deliberate, and incremental so that we continue to see that success and are able to maintain continuity. Next slide. We've had our 8th meeting, and yes, we will continue to count, so this one is number 8. And in our last meeting, we used our experts. We have 12 experts that are a part of that group. And in this case, we asked them to weigh in on these topics of importance. And so we frame some things, we talk about it, and then we hear different perspectives on this. If I were to generalize that, the Healthcare Leadership Council most recent meeting, is that we have consensus on almost everything, and what I would describe as really supportive and affirming comments about the design structure. And Mrs. Misbach, as a representative of the board, is on that healthcare. If I were to put it in my own words, it's we're doing good, by design, stay the course. That is the overarching message taken from the Healthcare Leadership Council last meeting. Next slide. Next slide's here just so people can pause and look again at who's on that committee if they're not sure. Next slide. We've talked about this, so what's new is what's on the right. It's an analogy I used with the staff and with the board. You know, when it comes to our flexibility and resiliency, you know, we're all wired a little different. We're all different kind of rubber band, but in the middle picture, the one thing that's true since probably late February, early March of 2020 is that we're all being stretched. However much stretch we have, we almost never get to a place where we can just totally relax. It could be something as simple as, oh man, I forgot to grab my mask out of my car, and you walk back 2 steps. Or you can't just run out to the store and grab something without thinking about 3 other things. Or do I have hand sanitizer in my car? Or did I do this? And all of that extra stuff, it just sort of wears you down. And so as a result, then it's far easier to behave or speak or act in ways that are not the normal way we do things. And so that's just the reality of where we are. Bottom picture, the more we can get those rubber bands together and work together, the stronger we are, the more resilient we are together. It's not meant to be corny. It's actually true, and so we want to just continue to do it. So, okay, next slide. So next steps. We are actively actively at the K through 12 levels, looking at the most recent selection data in order to determine how are we going to do this. So when, as soon as possible, but without us making mistakes. So we want to really figure that out. We're going to do it class and building and level by level and get that happening as soon as we possibly can. But we don't want to make a mistake. And we will need, and I'm thinking about K3 in particular, there is no way to handle 75% of families wanting in-person instruction and 4.5% or whatever wanting alternating day without the need for compromise and teamwork. And so I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but I would envision a time when families of a teacher are going to have to, we're going to have to solve it together. It isn't going to be perfect for everyone all the time. We're going to have to work together, because one of the things we know for sure is that when students begin a school year and they begin to form a relationship with their teacher and with their classmates, they don't want to miss that. They don't want to lose that. The thought of moving to a different teacher or class is upsetting, and it should be because of the quality of relationship. So that we have to think about that and try to find a good solution. We'll continue to monitor the conditions, and we'll continue to monitor confirmed or probable cases. And we'll manage that in the way that we shared earlier. Beginning this Friday, and this came out as a recommendation on our last call, beginning this Friday, we're going to do what I'll call a very brief, concise e-blast with certain components. And those components are things like, what are the conditions? It's updated every Friday, and so we'll just put the numbers there. And what are the FAQs this week? Or is there something happening with technology that we want to put a little tip in there because it's a frequently asked question? So in order to avoid, like this presentation, long, detailed presentations, this Friday quick hit will be a way to try, and we'll see how that works. So that'll start this Friday. And for those families 4 through 12 who are, again, their voices have been heard, they really want to tell us about the desire for 5-day-a-week in-person instruction, we'll develop a preference survey. But it won't just be, would you like your child in school every day? It will be something like, if the option exists, would you want your child in school 5 days a week, knowing that it means reduced distancing, increased likelihood of broader quarantine measures, potential need for school closures if an out. I mean, those are all part of you can't have one without at least being aware of the potential risk on the other. Our thought, and 20 is not a magic number, it's an arbitrary one, is that we would administer this survey when the incidence rate falls below 20. So if you remember back from that slide, 10.0 is the threshold of low transmission. It's not a magic number, but when we get down below 20, which we have not been, but we've been headed generally in a favorable trend, we would administer that. And again, we understand. So we understand the data. We understand, for example, that senior care centers in Allegheny County are going to impact the incidence rate. We understand that colleges and universities are going to impact the incidence rate. So we understand all of those things. We talk about that with Allegheny County Health Department. And again, it all fits within in the model. So, okay, that's it. Questions? I know it's a lot of information, but again, people will have the ability. We've been sharing this type of information, but I don't know how to make our thinking and work more clear.
When we talk about that incidence rate and the 20 figure, I guess what's starting to, I think I'm surprised we are where we are. I'm heartened we are where we are in the county, in the region. Maybe not there yet after 6 weeks. As we move forward, I mean, it's possible due to the factors that you mentioned that schools may not move it too much one way or the other, especially elementary population. So I am interested to see what it does as more schools go certainly we have a lot of movement from virtual to hybrid, I think, over the next few weeks when we look around the region, anecdotally at least. Because I wonder, given what we're seeing now, at some point, let me phrase this with my reaction to it is, multiple weeks of 35, I feel very differently about than bouncing back and forth or moving up and down or getting to 35 from having been at 10 before based on reactions. And I wonder if in the discussions with the Healthcare Leadership Council, if there was some sense of that, is there a background number, like background radiation, that's going to be very hard for us to get past and may not be so impactful on the population that we're responsible for?
So, I don't know if there's an answer to the question of magic, magic number, but back to the one slide. Safe and sustainable equals conditions plus cases over a larger sample size, plus the reality of reduced physical distancing. Many will speak to children, especially young children, and that's what comes to mind first around COVID. But we have 513 members, with our short-term subs, we have about 526 members of staff. We have bus drivers. We have cafeteria workers. We have others that have to be in the consideration of what does this mean. And so again, if I could and Mrs. Misbach could speak to this as she represents the board on that Healthcare Leadership Council, but there was not a single expert saying at this point, move more. They were all saying, great job. This is why this is why the design has all the elements that it has. Stay the course for now. There are districts around us who are starting. One of them, a large district, started 5-day in-person today. So over the next 14 days, we'll see how that goes. And they'll see how that goes. And to the extent communication happens, we'll understand what's going on, in terms of cases or closure or other implications. So, I don't think that there's a magic number, but in our weekly calls with Allegheny County Health Department, with our continued experts, if we reach a place where the incidence rates can be attributed to certain places or things, and the likelihood within our school walls is low of transmission, then maybe we look at that differently. But I just don't think we're there yet.
One of my concerns with that is, you mentioned it earlier, if we have to go closer than 6 feet, then I know because of my job, if someone in my classroom at the university gets diagnosed, but we keep that 6 feet radius, I don't get contact traced. I don't have to miss work.
Correct.
However, if we go closer than 6 feet and one person in that room now comes down with it, you now have an entire classroom and teachers, and then the ripple effect. That teacher's spouse now has to quarantine. If those teachers' kids go to a different school district, it affects them. So what concerns me is that idea of getting closer than 6 feet. To me, that is until we hit some of those lower numbers that you're talking about, that concerns me, because then it really does impact the community if we go with it less than 6 feet, because then more and more people are going to have to quarantine, and that just has a huge ripple effect in our community.
Yeah. There are, again, there are international studies that suggest 3 to 6 feet is appropriate, depending on the nature of the activity, what's happening in the room. Face coverings are a part of that. But yeah, again, it's all part of the equation. And I can tell you, we know a heck of a lot more today than we did a month ago. And a month from now, we will know more again. And so we'll continue to be open and learning and then taking those incremental steps.
So being on the Healthcare Leadership Council, just as Dr. Miller said, it was almost even pushing them to say, is there any point where you would suggest going back in, 5-day a week? And they were, no, there was not any point right now, and that they really wanted, if it was even being considered, it should be in increments. There wasn't a discussion as to what those increments would be, but it was in increments. We just don't know what's going to happen between the flu, the regular flu, and/or COVID itself, and it's still waiting to see. They still expect to see the numbers go up, not come down. So they weren't not in any favor of moving towards the 5-day-a-week at this point, so.
The one thing the selection survey shows us, though, Mr. Stover, can you go back to that slide? I think it's forward couple. One more. Keep going. Right there. So again, even though the hybrid didn't change, an example of an incremental step is we're going to have more children in our schools. So even though the hybrid is the same, we have more children coming in for in-person instruction, but we're able to accomplish that, we think, without sacrificing, at this point, the physical distancing. So again, we think that's the incremental kind of step. So again, K3, we're going to be finding a way to keep the big three going and yet seeing a shift in in-person instruction.
I have a quick question. I believe just today the CDC again released information about aerosol transmission. I know it's, and I don't know if they've retracted it again like they did last month, but I'm wondering in the next Healthcare Leadership Council, can we have that be a topic of discussion with our experts, give them some time to sort of analyze that and see if there's anything we need to adapt or change based upon the new aerosol recommendations from the CDC?
Yeah, we keep a little list of things that emerge in between meetings, and we've been trying to schedule meetings prior to using a cadence of board meetings, so be happy to do that. Again, the other data point, though, is also cases. So, we're able, we know, it's confidential, but obviously we know what's happening here all the time. So we know how many people are out for tests, to a large degree right now. We understand when those results come back and they're willing to share with us what's going on. So that's the local data point on cases that I don't want to say regardless of transmission, but as the experts learn more about transmission, what we have happening with our big three is serving to minimize that risk, which is positive, and hopefully it'll continue.
And they were even recommending still, the healthcare experts were, of being outside, going outside, even down to like 32. They said if you can get the kids outside. So.
I just wanted to respond to the comment earlier about, staying at 35 versus bouncing around. So the second metric we use, which is the PCR positivity rate, that really is an important metric because it in itself is a measure of how well the testing is going. Are they testing enough people so that we know that the data that they're getting indicates that the actual rate of prevalence in the community matches what we think that it is. And so it's both of those things are important and helpful. The earlier CDC guidelines were recommending having that PCR positivity rate be below 3. Then it was expanded up to 5. And so it shows the learning that's happening. And so, people just, I think, need to be aware, okay, if it ever reaches 20 for incidence rate per 100,000, we also need to pay attention to the other measure, too, and see what's happening there.
Yeah, and we do I monitor this every day, and usually I try to take a crack at what I think the next public COVID dashboard release is. I mean, right now, this week, we're tracking where incidence rate, as reported on October 9th, will likely be higher. So we're tracking in that way at this point, unless we have a change in the next few days. But positivity percentage may be lower, because each day as they report the number of confirmed cases, they're also reporting the number of tests by which that happens, and you can begin to see the relationship between those.
So I am the 5 mile over the speed limit guy, and So if anyone's wondering if there's more than one side being voiced in the board, I'm definitely voicing that side. I feel like we are in a 20-mile under the speed limit right now, and I'm a 5-mile over, and I think there's something in the middle, but I do think that we continue, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I think we continue towards the conservative. I understand that. We all did that, especially at the very beginning of this. But I think some numbers have changed that we don't really talk about. And we talk about incident rate, we talk about the testing rate. But what we don't talk about is where the hospitalizations and death figures are. And as the rates overall have climbed, the hospitalizations and the deaths have been down. There's been talk, and there's so many iterations of what people discuss on this, whether the virus is actually mutated into something else that's not as deadly. I don't know. I think what it is we've learned a lot educationally, and we learned that putting, people over the age of 70 or 80 is a very bad thing if they're exposed. People under the age of 70, under the age of 60, under the age of 50, the incident rates ending up negatively are much, much lower. And I understand, and what everyone in the community needs to understand, in my opinion, is that there are two sides pushing on this. So no one's going to be 100% happy unless you're the exact middle of the road person, which doesn't seem to be a lot of the community when you look at some of the emails that we get. But I do believe that right now we should at least ask the question of the community, this is my opinion, ask the question, would you want to be 5-day? Not that we're going to do it, but I want to know what those numbers look like. Because what iterations would we need to come up with to talk about social distancing? I would like to look personally at the guidelines are that guidelines, but they seem like they are being more treated as magic numbers. I would like to see those pressed a little bit and those questions asked at the Leadership Council to say, is 6 feet the right number? Because when you do look international, they say 3 to 6. So if we arrange a room at 5 feet, where are we? If we arrange a room at 4 feet, where are we? So that we can fit maybe more of the community in. Those are kind of the incremental steps that I look at, but that would be from going from, in my opinion, 20 miles below the speed limit, not to 5 over, but to maybe 5 under or at the speed limit. So those are where I would push. Those are the questions that I would ask. I feel like what is being considered safe is the cases versus what was originally considered safe from the CDC and the World Health Organization. What we were asked was, we want to protect hospitalization, death rates, things like that, but it wasn't to prevent everyone from getting the cases or getting the virus. And I feel like that's where we are as a community in whole. I'm not just talking Pine-Richland. I think we're a microcosm of that. I think that everyone pays very close attention now to the cases versus exactly how many people are getting seriously ill. And when you look at projections and you look at asymptomatic and how many didn't we actually test, I've seen numbers that say we've only got anywhere from 50% to 10% of the actual number of people who have contracted the illness. So I don't know where we are with the exact number of cases, but I do see where hospitalizations are. I do see where death rates are. And so that's why I push. And I say that for the fact of the community to know at whole that is being expressed to the board, to the administration. I'm one of the folks that happens to voice that. I believe there's others, but again, it's not just one side, and I get an opinion, or I developed an opinion from the number of emails that we get that people think it's one way or the other way. There are folks asking those questions. The decisions that are being made are not gonna make everyone happy, but what it does is it allows us to stay open. We deliberate on these questions, we make a decision, and we need to move forward. And that's what we're doing. We're moving forward in every one of these decisions we make. Whether everyone agrees with them all or not, our job is to keep this school open. Our job is to keep this school safe. We can disagree on the metrics, we can disagree on the decisions, but I don't think we can attack the process, because the process has been solid. If you're an insider and you're seeing this process, there's nobody that can argue that.
Yeah, so thank you. On that COVID early warning dashboard. So we do monitor all the other measures all the time. They're just not on the slide because they're not a part of the thresholds around educational models. So on the weekly call with Allegheny County, just so that you're aware, Dr. Brink, who's the chief epidemiologist, she reviews all of those numbers on a weekly basis, and I look at that stuff all the time. So that is definitely a part of what we're doing.
Greg, I am beginning to get ready, especially at the younger grades, to see us, move in that direction as well. I would say, to the extent we gather that data, I would hope that it specifies, and this is where it gets interesting. So I would like my son to go 5 days a week in the hybrid model where he's distanced, right? So which is just not an option.
It's not, right.
It's just not an
Correct.
option. So
Right.
so it changes. You could, and maybe even should have, well, if it's 5 days a week, our full virtual numbers could go up 10%. And that might help, by the way. But not enough to make it. So it's very hard. It's sort of that conditional question asking. I would like to see that as well. So I'm glad we're going to move toward gathering that data. It's interesting about risk. It feels like the time to take more risk. And I agree with that, but I partly resist it. It feels that way because we've taken some risks in other areas collectively. As a district, as a community, we have a high-risk sport that's taking place Friday. We celebrate it, we embrace it, it's going on. And that's happening around Allegheny County. So as a community, and we see this in professional sports going on too, right? It begins, you feel okay, we're okay with this. That's the natural inclination. But then the correct response in terms of a risk continuum is, I've chosen to take my risk here. That actually means I should pull back over here, not that I should take more. And when it means you should move more is when the data doesn't move in reaction to those incremental moves. So I like you said, that the process is focusing on that data and that we're continuing to monitor along those lines.
One of the things that we rarely talk about here, I think it's understood, but there must be a staff to deliver the educational program. And so in the community building and empathy slide, what I indicated was an ideal solution for one may not be an ideal solution for another. And one of the realities of where we are right now is if a staff member's not feeling well, what should they do? What do they do? If they're working with, your family member, what do you want a staff member who doesn't feel well to do? You want them to stay home, right? That's our recommendation for everybody. So what does that mean? It means that if they're feeling okay, not well enough to attend, but they can deliver instruction, we're using technology to have that teacher who's at home deliver instruction through technology to in-person students, and we're trying to put a day-to-day sub in the room to have the adult presence for supervision. The amount of gymnastics happening to try to ensure that we, and this is true of other school districts, this isn't a Pine-Richland thing, this is the reality, is that it's a challenge. And people are quarantined for different reasons. That impacts the ability to deliver instruction. I mean, so again, there are so many parts and pieces to running an education organization. It isn't just about what model would you prefer. It's not just about what measures should we be looking at. It's the practical reality of making that happen. So what Mr. Lyons, what I heard him just say was, if we force a decision, he didn't use these words, I am, but if we push a decision, we may get a certain number of people that want X. But those that were comfortable with Y aren't going to be comfortable with X, and so we're pushing them to Z, right? I mean, this is all a part of that's what you're talking about. That's all a part of this, and I think that's a challenge. But it's back to that slide number 3, looking on the right side of that slide at all of those different stakeholders and understanding the differences, they're significant. So, again, I don't feel, even if there's a strong opinion given strongly, passionately, When I think about the thousands and thousands of families in Pine-Richland, it's a relative small number, even when it feels like it's a lot. And that's because the vast majority of our families sort of get, they really are, everybody's pitching in to do the best they can. And that's the awesome part about having these conversations here.
If I can just say, the Mathematica report says a lot
It's
about
excellent.
risk.
It
It
sure
says
does.
a lot about risk. The modeling that's in there is truly excellent, and they do model things like prevalence in the community and how it affects the school and the educational design. And so for people who are looking at trying to push, it's worth going and reading and exploring that to see how that can lead to different pathways and how we are set up in a very resilient model that can adjust to what those conditions are like.
Yeah. And again, for those who will take some time with that report, we most closely resemble scenario E of the Mathematica report. So that would be the one to sort of have in mind as you're reading through the report and the appendices.
Just one thing I want to say for the community at large is, again, folks like me, and I'm reminded this, and this is one of the great things about the way that we are designed as a board and the way that we govern here, is when we make decisions, you know, we make the decisions and move forward. What we did at the beginning of the school year was really an experiment for a lot of the county. And as you look around, it took, 7 weeks for many in our county to make the decision to get in the direction of where we are now. And one of the things that people have to understand about this, again, this is the way I'm looking at it, is this data doesn't necessarily come right away. When we're looking at data, a lot of it is a lag data. So what Dr. Miller said about some of the folks that are moving to 5-day, some of the other districts that are moving more into a hybrid now, those numbers are going to be prevalent in those areas, or they're going to be, relevant in those school districts in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks to really understand it. And kids are going to be funneling back into those schools at first. So we may be talking almost a month before those numbers are really firm, and that's what we're seeing in people kind of following our model. So understand that. Again, we're going to be pushing forward as a district, but understand that it doesn't happen overnight. We all want it to, and trust me, I don't like the term new normal. I want normal, and I want normal fast. But every once in a while, when you're a risk taker, you need that person on the side going, you know, it might not be a good time to jump off that cliff. And sometimes you do that, you realize, you know, on your dirt bike when you're a kid, bones break. So we're trying to avoid that, but in a cautious enough way that we're still moving forward.
And normal or not, it's just so hard when you know the challenges that families are faced with. You know, when you're talking about 4th graders, 5th graders that are, you know, every other day home, navigating that, trying to stay engaged, trying to stay motivated. It's been a tremendous opportunity for a lot of parents to connect and drive forward with that, but we're relying on them quite heavily, and we're so thankful to be able to do that. And we hear and understand the frustrations because it's not working 100% of the time, we know, and we're devoted to reaching out and making sure it does work for every student every time. But we do hear that loud and clear. We will keep working on that. This is not a voting item tonight, so this was an information session that we have at the top of our meeting to help, especially if we anticipate a lot of listeners at home. So we will move into recognition of visitors at this point if there is no further questions from the board. Just a reminder, if you do speak, address the board, let us know who you are. Try to limit yourself to 3 minutes. We do not typically take this time to answer specific questions, but if you do have them and raise them, someone from the administration can get back to you. Ms. Williams, do we have anyone in the waiting room?
We do. We have 2 people. The first person will be Mr. Jarvis. Hello, Mr. Jarvis?
Hi, it's Dr. Jarvis.
Hi, Dr. Jarvis. Go ahead. You're welcome to speak to the board.
Hello all. I am James Jarvis, Jim Jarvis. I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to speak. My purpose for asking for this time is to address the issues revolving around COVID and the return to school. As a background, I'm a practicing internist of 20 years. I do not deal in models. COVID, in my opinion, is a clinical disease, and I have seen, treated, tested, and advised thousands of patients at this point, and I've pronounced 6 of them dead, which is 6 times the number of people who have died in all of Pine Township. I have 3 specific talking points that I would like to address. While your efforts at hybrid modeling may be attributable to some of the decreased transmission, I might suggest that so might just the natural history of this disease. So to make the leap that modeling in the hybrid manner is the reason for success may not be completely true, although I don't think it hurts. Return to school appears to be based to me primarily upon Allegheny County's numbers, as Dr. Miller has elicited here, and it seems to be revolving around cases per 100,000 amongst other parameters, as you pointed out. But the biggest hang-up seems to be the cases per 100,000. And in my opinion, it is a mistake to let that be the hang-up as a progression to returning to full-time. I might argue that Pine Township and Richland Township is not at all represented by Allegheny County's numbers. These numbers are being driven primarily by nursing home populations, which is not at all involved in community spread. So 75% of those cases per 100,000 or so are derived from nursing homes, which have nothing to do with our current situation. Also, the number of cases that are reported are measurements of positive tests and not truly of novel cases. In other words, it's my opinion that these numbers are completely inflated. Regardless of my opinion of the quality of the data, I think we can all agree that the mortality is 0 in school-age kids and virtually 0 when looking at 60 years of age or younger. In summary, my question is, how close to 0 do you all need to be to consider returning to school full-time? Because we're pretty darn close to that right now. We also need to loosen up attendance and restrictions at sporting events, in my opinion. Our neighbors such as Seneca and Mars, as well as the majority of private schools, seem to be okay. Why can't we do this? And then my fear is that our kids are falling behind. That's number 1. Number 2, a common rebuttal to returning to school is what happens when COVID outbreaks occur within the school. And it seems that there is a fear that we will have to shut down again in response to an outbreak within the school. And I may suggest that there is an option, that is an option, but not the only option. The other option may be to simply send the affected or symptomatic student or staff member home. We have positive cases such as nurses, doctors, and staff at the hospital, and we don't shut down whenever we have them. When we have 1, 2, 3, or even 10 people who get it, we don't shut the hospital down, we simply move on. Neither does Giant Eagle or Target or McDonald's for that matter. So I don't see any reason why a school would be any different. In summary on that point is my fear that the need to shut down or to go 100% virtual should not be the decision point behind not to go back full-time. Lastly, it's a simpler topic. Can I please ask in a practical manner that we dispense with the COVID questionnaires prior to sporting activities or extracurricular activities, as I can speak firsthand that they're very annoying. I think they're completely inaccurate because I find it hard to believe that everybody is actually taking the temperature of their kid, and I'm sure it's a burden to the coaches and the staff. Mostly, they serve no discernible purpose at my reflection to this. And so can we just agree as parents and as a district to simply dispense with the forms and move on to a smarter, kind of more logical sense and say that if your kid's sick, just keep them at home? In other words, can we stop the questionnaires? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis.
Okay, our second speaker will be Mrs. Barton. Hi, Mrs. Barton.
Yes, this is Carly.
Hi, you're with the school board, so you're welcome to go ahead and address them.
Oh, very good, thank you. Good evening, my name is Carly Fagan Barton. My children are Quincy, Jalen, and Miles Niels. Quincy graduated in 2019, Jalen's at the middle school, and Miles at Eden Hall. Thanks for your time this evening and allowing me to have the floor. In addition to being a parent in the district, I'm a member of the Pine-Richland Anti-Racism Coalition, and I'm with you this evening representing our group. As you likely know, we've been working really closely with the district to improve the racial climate for Black and Brown students and their families. And it's my understanding this evening's meeting is intended to address policies related to Title IX. The coalition's asking the board to also establish policies that make displays of hate symbols a violation of Pine-Richland School District policy. Such policies should establish appropriate disciplinary measures, and the same should be strictly enforced. When we think about this, we think of examples of hate displays to include things like Confederate symbols, Confederate flags, and other recognized white supremacy symbols. These symbols these symbols present in our schools are disruptive to the educational environment and should be prohibited from all school property. Consistent with this ask, we'd like to call the district's attention to a recently released open letter that was drafted by Pine-Richland alumni. The letter asked that diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as racial sensitivity, be made an immediate priority. This letter contained very heartfelt alumni testimonials. It's been signed already by over 400 students and families, and I think the testimonials really share the hurt and the disruption that racism has caused in the district during our alumni's time at PR. As I listened to the board convene and I listened to Dr. Miller's remarks around community building and empathy, that's really the ask here. It's for empathy for the disruption to the educational process and the environment caused by these symbols. Kids come to school to learn and to grow and to feel safe and protected by their teachers in their school. And we really hope that this community will be empathetic to how disruptive those symbols are as they contemplate policy changes outside of Title IX. Thank you for all of the work you're doing. I know this is an incredibly difficult time that demands meaningful amounts of the board and the district's time. Thank you so much for your sensitivity to this matter, and really thank you for listening to me this evening.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers tonight, Ms. Williams? Thank you. Correspondence, Ms. Williams.
People reached out to board members through board secretary Lisa Harvey regarding marching band, Brad Balkovic regarding internet costs, regarding return to school that includes Bonnie DeLuca, Angie DeJesus, Ann Williams, Laura Patansky, Chris Bonneau, Jessica Wilson, Christine Black, Judy Masucci, Marcy Fisher, James Dowdy, Sarah Irwin, and Jake Primus. Regarding athletics was Heidi Donovan, Jane Gochitz, Corey Bach, Amy Turchik, Chris Lentz, Melissa Nicely, and Karen Bukowski.
Thank you. Item 1.05 is a motion to approve the school board minutes from the combined meeting of September 14th as attached.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion carries. item 2.01 is a strategic plan update and a bit of good news.
Yeah, so I feel like I've used my allotment of minutes here already tonight. So it's written in public content, people can read it. I will say the district received the Mastery Award through the Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Performance Excellence. This framework assesses all aspects of how we operate the district. The exciting part of the recognition is it reinforces hard work from the past. The equally exciting part of the feedback report is that it helps us see all of the areas for growth. And so we're pleased with progress we've made. We've got a ton of work to do, and this initiative helps us to do it. So more information to share in the future.
Everything you mention in here is always just a sliver of the reality behind it. You probably just hit that ratio. What you mentioned is such a sliver of such a big thing, and the amount of work that goes into it and how it drives, how we look at our processes and drive our performance. So I think that's the biggest ratio difference you've ever had, because I know what this entails. We're looking at the report. I encourage all board members to read that detailed feedback. I know we had a lot coming into this meeting, so there'll be a reminder again for everyone to look at that, because it drives so much, and so many of the faces here in this room have worked so hard toward that accomplishment, and it's not a one and done. It's a process. So,
Mr. Lyons, may I jump in for 1 second?
please.
I just want to take a second as someone who does accreditation work as part of my job. I know how hard it is and what accomplishment this really is. And this system, this district lives and breathes the continuous improvement, and that's shown in here. So this is not to be understated. This is a big deal. So thank you for everyone who put work into this.
You're in deficit, but we can still talk about it. We do have some voting items tonight on the planning agenda. Item 3.01 is a motion to approve the revised athletics, activities, health, and safety plan as attached. Could I have a second?
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. I'd like to invite the administration to provide an update here. Dr. Pasquinelli.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. There's something in Google Docs called revision history. If you would explore the revision history of the athletic and activity plan, you would be overwhelmed at the amount of revisions. But that's just the reality of our times, and we're constantly getting updates and guidance, and things are changing. So this is actually the 4th time we've brought this plan forward to the board for approval. Our goal is to be able to make minor adjustments without having to do this, but we also understand that there are sometimes more significant changes that we want to have an opportunity to have a conversation and share those updates with the board. So tonight it's really around spectator and participant limits. That number has, as you sure have followed, fluctuated over time. As Dr. Miller mentioned earlier, we had just last week U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit granted a stay on the district court decisions, which basically took us back to the targeted mitigation order of 25 or less for an indoor event and 250 or less for an outdoor event, and that's across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We've shared in the past some guidelines around Allegheny County and WPIAL and PIAA, so all those things are constantly in play, and at this point, those mitigation efforts of 25 and 250 are back in terms of the expectations. We have implemented those in the past through our athletic and activity plans. We have found success with those, and we will continue to follow those guidelines as we are told to do. The update, in addition, in the plan is for the board to consider if we get some modifications and some more flexibility around those numbers, to permit this administration to make recommendations that are always going to be focused around the health and safety and welfare of our student athletes, our band members, any other student that's involved in an activity, and our coaches and sponsors. We look at every event differently. We know that a tennis match is very different than an indoor volleyball game, so we have to think about that in terms of recommendations that we would make if we would be permitted to increase past that 25 and 250. We started moving in that direction prior to last week. And again, what we're focused on is, can we manage it? Can we keep the physical distancing? can we keep our kids and our coaches and sponsors in a good position? So again, back to our ultimate goal, keep them in school, keep them playing, keep them participating. We feel like we can do that. So that's the modification of the plan, is the board looking at that and allowing us to consider each event and make recommendations for each of those events. What Mr. Simmons is going to share with you is a specific example. So I think Mr. Stobiner, you've already pulled it up. If you scroll down, I think it's to the top of page 3 or 4, we have a visual of our stadium. And with this particular visual, we have used the event that typically brings in the most people, and that's a football game. When we think of a football game, it is a football game, so we have to think about those participants, those direct participants first. But when you also think about a football team, you think about the band, and for Pine-Richland, that's 250 people. When you think about a football game, you think about cheerleaders. That's another 22 people and their coaches and support. So what we did is we looked at our stadium, we literally mapped it out, we went over and measured and X'd off seats, and we said, can we manage an event that's a little more significant? Again, the capacity is 10,000, so we're not talking about anywhere close to the standing room capacity, but with the support of Mr. Simmons, his team, and others, can we manage an event? And he's going to kind of talk you through that. And then that is probably the most extreme, because right now we have events like soccer and field hockey and cross country that we are very much able to support and manage that. So, Sean, if you want to talk through this diagram, and then we'll open it up for any questions.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? What I'd like you to focus on tonight is the direct participants for a portion of this diagram. We have 6 direct participant portions, and the number one part is the get through to you that the direct participants are the people who take part in the event. And we feel like we want to increase that number. We feel pretty confident we can manage it. We have been moving forward safely, continuously, and successfully with our plans. We've analyzed the stadium, the capacity, and everything else that goes into that. We feel pretty confident we can do this. Of those 6 pods, the 100-team PR pod is the football players who are going to take part in the event. Visiting team pods on the top, that's the teams that we'll be participating in. We have 2 more home games scheduled right now. And the 10 competition referees in the middle, these are the people that are essential for the event to go on. We would like to include the cheerleaders. They're part of that Friday night experience, and we think they should be a part of it. One of the things we're recommending is we bring our band in. That's one of the pods in blue there. We have 250 members we'd like to include in that as well. Close to this upcoming event, we may be in homecoming, and we'd like to include the homecoming court. And if you look on the top right on that corner there, you'd see we want to include at least 32. We have room for 32 spectators to hold that. So we feel pretty confident that we can include and increase the spectator limits and manage it safely and keep everybody in a safe distance and keep everybody separated. Another portion of this is the spectators, and we would like to increase that experience for our spectators. We'd like to include more. We'd like to offer what we're proposing is 2 tickets for each PR participant. That way we can get our parents into at least experience of the experience, the Friday night experience, and I mean it just creates a more family atmosphere. So we feel that we have the team ready to manage this. We're ready to move forward, and we just wanted to present that to you tonight.
Just one more, this concept to consider. You've seen the concept of pods before. We left that in there intentionally because that is about trying to keep groups of people together as much as possible. Understand that the number 100 is that came back from if you recall, the communication that came out between WPIAL and Allegheny County Health Department. Typically, our pods are less than that. Our visiting teams' pods are less. This is one of those top level in terms of numbers. Most likely, our pods are more in the 60 to 70 range for a football game, and I think we're at 244 with band. So there's a little bit of fluctuation there, but it gives you an idea of something that we would consider if, again, conditions and everything are continuing moving in the right direction, and able to manage this with our staff and the support of our community to follow those big three. We think we can do that in many of our events. So that's what we're asking for tonight, board, to review this plan and consider in terms of approving it, allowing us to make some of those recommendations if in the future we have that opportunity to do so.
So again, I'm going to add this just to make sure we're crystal clear. The plan, the limits by the Third Circuit right now are 250 and 25. So they're in place, we'll adhere to those. But if something changes, as it has changed every week since I can remember, we will be ready to do this immediately as long as we have understanding and support for the underlying principles of design. So that's what we're saying. We think we can do this, and if afforded the opportunity to have discretion, we would be ready to do it. Otherwise, the Third Circuit's 25-250 is what will drive us.
Quick question, what is the thought about masks in this? Are spectators expected to
Everybody.
mask? Okay.
If there are 6 feet, go ahead, Mike.
What we've communicated, indoor events is 100%, masks all the time. We have communicated at an outdoor event, once you are seated with your direct family members, there would be that opportunity, but any movement in an outdoor event to use the restroom or pass by anyone else, the expectations is the mask would be back in place.
Within this plan, have you given consideration to bottlenecks? I think about large crowds lining up to enter. This is still a decent number. People do tend to all arrive at once. You have to collect tickets because you have to have tickets because you have to put a limit. So it might seem easier to open up 4 or 5 gates. But so have you guys given some thought to that?
We have. Again, vast majority are participants, so we're managing the student body. That part we feel really good about. In terms of the spectators and how they would flow in and when they would flow in, those are the direct participants, family members. So those coaches, and through Mr. Simmons and those coaches, would be working to coordinate where they would enter, how we could be able to stagger them, and clear signage to make sure that we're following those guidelines as they're coming in. Again, what we've talked about from the get-go, car to car, this would be the same thing. From the time you get out of your car, what happens to the time you get back into your car, we have to think through all of those things.
So I'll ask the question. It's not the most pleasant one, but about restroom facilities and having crowds enter, how many people go through them, how many at one time. Not the most pleasant question, but could be a source of spread, so.
Yeah. Again, we've talked about that as well. That is something with some staff support. There would be more activity in terms of cleaning in the restrooms over the course of those evenings. We do have the additional facilities now that are over in our new visitors locker area that can spread some people out in addition to what we typically use for a home game. So again, have considered it. We realize there's some staffing implications around that to make sure that cleanliness occurs and it's frequent, but that's a reality, I understand.
Yeah, concession stands not open as a part of this.
Yeah,
and
that's
again,
correct.
I think the difference is, and that's why beyond the underlying sort of moral question, which I find frustrating, don't you care? That is disappointing to hear those kind of questions, is those who think managing an event of this, even 1,200, if they think it's simple, they don't understand what it is to really run an event. So the difference here is staggered arrival, clear direction, direct participants, parents of direct participants, and once you come in, the idea is you find your spot and you're not moving around. It is as opposite a typical home environment where there's 50-50 happening, kids are, it is not that. It is let's try to find a way to safely get the direct participants involved, the parents of direct participants and a few other people, and how can we manage that? So that's what this is about.
And this grouping of, that you have here for each of these sections, the 336 spectators and so on, this allows for the 6-foot distancing?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Yes, that's correct. Band members, all
At the band as well, so we use the band as an example there. So we literally have two X's for one band member. One is the person and the other is their instrument. So we have that kind of mapped out.
Okay.
So again, I share that as an example of attention to detail by the team. I mean, this isn't, let's get together at 4:30 this afternoon and put a slide together. This is hours of discussion and planning, trying to lead and manage the district.
I appreciate all the thought and detail put into this, and I think this goes to Mr. DiTullio's point that I think we're going from 20 miles under to maybe about 10 miles under with this. I think it's a step in the right direction, making use of the outdoor space. I had a question, I just lost it. Oh, yes. We've had some members of the community ask about what prevents them from just showing up. And my understanding is, we don't let parents come to the school during a school day. This is a school event. So in terms of the limits here and who gets in and allowing parents, I just want to make it understand that we are clear on this is a school event that needs invite only, right?
Yeah, 100%. That is an invite only. We have said from the get-go, if we would be over this capacity and people would just show up, we don't want to be confrontational, but we simply would pause the competition until those people would leave. So we don't want to put anybody in that position. We've had people reach out and we've told them that, please don't put our student athletes in our community position where we would have to pause it. We would ask that. We're doing everything we can through live streaming. We've modified some schedules of games as we did this past weekend so people can see their kids playing and the community can see and appreciate that well. But it's not just football. We have done it with every other sport. We're live streaming tennis. We've never done that before. We're capturing video for golf. It's going to be more of a package that we're going to provide to the families there, but we're trying to do as much as we can because we understand, how passionate people are, and it's their children, and they've been watching them grow up, and they want to see them play high school sports, but we're also in a global pandemic, so we keep reminding them of that too. So, yes.
I would also add, as we look ahead, this outdoor environment is far simpler than what's coming. So what's coming is wrestling, swimming, and boys and girls basketball, indoor environments with all sorts of things. So the challenge of an outdoor environment in this case is just the number of participants, but at least it's an outdoor big environment. There's a lot of challenge coming down the line indoors.
Just add to that. I mean, with the plus of what we're doing, we learned a lot from the fall, from phase 1 through phase 3. Mr. Simmons just held a meeting the other day, I think that was last week, with his winter and spring coaches to get out ahead and make sure they clearly understand the development and what we learned from the fall experience that we can apply to the winter and spring. So we're starting phase 1 with winter. So we actually had girls basketball today, again 25 or less, and we have boys basketball early conditioning happening, which is the progression that we had in the summertime with fall. So that is continuing. Spring, they're fired up. They want to start, but right now we said winter, and then we'll move from there.
What spring sports typically would start this early?
With some form of conditioning. If there were not restrictions in place, there's stuff going on for almost everybody all the time.
Any other questions or comments from the board? I'll share some thoughts because we talked about Whipple, and when we last reviewed this plan in detail, we talked about Whipple, about ADs throughout the region being on board, and when we participate in a league, and while I'm comfortable with what we're doing, every time we see this plan, I have to recognize that we're actively saying we want to participate in this league, and I am not comfortable with what Whipple's doing. I'm not comfortable with their approach to crowds. I'm not comfortable with their commitment to safety. Even before the district court ruled against the 250-person limit, schools in Whipple openly in the press admitted, hey, 400 people at my stadium, it's good, it's safe, with zero consequence from Whipple. No support from them whatsoever. It's defining, we can do this, you give an inch, we'll take a mile. And I really, and I'm comfortable with that approach. I'm uncomfortable with how it permeates what I'm seeing in our highest risk sport on TV every Friday night. If these coaches were NFL coaches, we'd be collecting $1 million every Saturday morning from the lack of compliance with masking. What does Whipple do about it? Nothing. Zero. I can't enforce, but the league can. And the league is absolutely toothless and showing no leadership whatsoever. And these are the districts that we're competing with, and this is the league that we're walking into with this. So it makes me uncomfortable to the extent that what we're talking about here is not Pine-Richland in this education, in this return to sports plan. We're talking about Pine-Richland participating in a league that I'm not comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with what they're doing. I'm not comfortable with the leadership they're showing.
I appreciate you sharing that. You know, one thing that I just want to make sure the board and community is aware of, we understand that every district is approaching things differently and looking at it differently, and we do play outside of Allegheny County as well. What we are trying to do that we believe we can control is talk to those school districts and ensure that they are going to do the things that we expect in order to keep our kids and coaches safe. You know, one just example is with locker rooms. We have said some schools are using locker rooms. We have said we're not going to do that. So an expectation that that school can accommodate us to have an outdoor space, to have a halftime get-together with our student athletes that still follows our health and safety plan. If they can't, we did have a case with one school district. There was a lot of back and forth, and there was conversation of postponing. Now, we were able to find a way through our health and safety plan and some modifications that they were willing to make that event occurred. So we're trying not to put our student athletes in the middle. We're trying to find ways, but if it gets to the point where we're not comfortable with the health and safety plan that we've designed through the implementation of a place that our kids have to go, then we're willing to make modifications if we have to around the scheduling or even cancellation of that if we would have to do something. We don't want to do that, but that's something we would consider based upon that district that we're working with.
So I do appreciate the, as of like 2 weeks ago, the communication that you had with the, as far as with the school district that we were playing in football, that back and forth, them letting us know and about a case that they had and the consequences and so on, and that you followed through the steps that you said that you would, and so it really appreciate that.
Any other discussion? As a reminder, this is a voting item. It's been seconded. All those in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.02 is a motion to approve personnel supplementals and STA transportation personnel as attached.
Second?
Is there any discussion?
I would just like to acknowledge a couple resignations that we had from paraprofessionals. I have personal experience with both of these individuals, both of them exceptional paras. We will be hard pressed to replace these individuals at anywhere near the same level. I wish them all the best. I know they were both one moderate term, one long, I'll call long term. When you're reaching a decade, I'd say that's long term with an institution, and I owe them both a personal debt of gratitude, and I think the school as well benefited immensely from these two, and I really hope that the replacements can come anywhere close, because we'll be doing very well if we do that.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Mrs. Wilson and Kelly.
I also wanted to just point out that in the supplementals, where, one of the things in there is the building level technology coaches who have had a very important year of, stepping up and rising to the occasion and leading their relative schools through this difficult time adapting to new technologies, new situations, and there's been a lot put upon them. And from what I hear from the teachers, they've been doing an outstanding job, and the administrators have said that as well. So thank you to the building level technology coaches.
Thank you, Ben. Any other discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.03 is a motion to approve the purchase of a one-year G Suite Enterprise license for $10,920.
Second?
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.04 is a motion to approve student attendance and application of the Student Discipline Code for a Pine-Richland High School boys golf team to travel to York, PA to participate in PIA individual state championships.
Second?
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.05 is a motion to approve the casting of vote on behalf of Pine-Richland School District for the following individuals to serve as officers for PSBA. David Hine as President-elect, running unopposed. Daniel O'Keefe as Vice President, which is a contested seat. Michael Gossert as Treasurer, and Marshall Pieta as Western at-large representative, both running unopposed. The following individuals serve 3-year terms as trustees for PSBA Insurance Trust, Kathy Swope and Mark B. Miller. So there is essentially, I want to highlight this, one area where we have discretion in terms of the vote. I've put Dan O'Keefe's name in there, serves with Kasha and Christine at the A.W. Beatty Joint Chair Board, and I serve with him at the AIU, so I'm happy to recommend that vote.
Second?
Thank you, Christine.
Right.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Kashani, I hear you about 30 milliseconds behind us on the vote, so do you want to handle finance there remotely, or would you like us to walk through it?
I'm happy to do it. I think I can. It's not that extensive. Item 4.01 is an information item. At the regular October meeting, we'll be approving some financial reports. Item 4.02 is also informational. At the regular meeting, we'll also be approving budget transfers, which is the first that we've had in a while. And then item 4.03, we would like to schedule a couple finance committee meetings for those dates of December 14th and March 1st.
Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure.
Any issues with those dates on the meetings, board members?
I'll be out of town on the 14th. I know that for sure, so, and I won't be able to attend virtually at that point.
They're good for me.
And that's typically the audit presentation, so that's a fairly fixed date when they present to us.
Mr. DiTilio, Buildings and Grounds?
Item 5.01 is to schedule a Buildings and Grounds meeting on November 16th at 6 p.m. This is before a regular meeting, I believe. It's a combined. So. And that works
Field
for me.
6 here also?
What's that?
Do you want to mention Field 6, since it's up and running?
At that meeting, I believe that's what we're going to be reviewing.
And as I think, Dr. King, it's outstanding. So if you haven't seen it, go out and see it. It's pretty amazing. I think it'll be one of those spaces that we wonder how we did without it. Kids will be on it, all the time. It's flexible for all sorts of different activities, not just athletic activities. It is the epitome of a project that benefits tons of people. So it's really, really great. As the board knows and community, $500,000 of that project was provided through grant funding, which is excellent. The bidding process that was undertaken brought the project in even lower than anticipated when it was designed. So we feel really good about that. No debt is connected to that project. It is a part of the capital funding plan. So that's why we have those two tied together.
Thanks, Greg. And another committee meeting. Dr. Meyer?
This is just a public information meeting that an academic achievement meeting is scheduled for November 23rd at 6 p.m. The academic achievement and growth report will be presented.
Which I am really looking forward to. I look forward to every year. But I know each of these meetings require a little bit of our time, but a lot of time behind the scenes from you folks. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just make a quick note, unless you want to, Dr. Justice.
Certainly, it's going to be a little different than it has been in years past. Obviously, with the impact of COVID-19, we did not have the standardized tests that we would have in the past, so some of the lagging measures of achievement that we typically would have, we do not. We are also making an intentional effort to focus on the real-time measures that we have on a day-to-day basis in terms of how we're taking data, collecting it from students, and having it impact that model for teaching and learning. So what revisions are we making to curriculum and courses, and how are we responding to individual student needs? In the past, we had spent about 80% of our time on the analysis and about 20% on the what does this mean and let's get it in action. We're trying to kind of flip that model on its head, if you will, to really take what we're doing and drive the academic impact from there. So you'll see the fruits of that on the 23rd.
Dr. Meyer's eyes are beaming, so the opportunity to free ourselves from the tyranny of standardized tests, we're excited to see what freedom that gives us. I truly mean that. Thanks, Carla. Student Services, Dr. Campbell.
All right, item 7.01 is an information item that at our next meeting, we will have a motion to approve the PTO and booster organizations in accordance with our board policy 915. Item 7.02 is another information item. At our next meeting, we'll have a motion to approve the small games of chance resolution for the groups that are in that resolution. Item 7.03, another information item that we're going to have a motion to approve the purchase of a TriCaster and 5 cameras for a total of $18,910. Help support our PRTV efforts to get the sporting events to all the families that can't attend in person. So we appreciate PRTV's work in that area. Item 7.04 is information item with a Hall of Fame update that will be honoring the new inductees during the invitation-only announcement prior to the Pine-Richland High School football game on Friday, October 16th. And I just want to recognize our inductees one more time here. Almer Girdwood, the late Robert McDonough, Kerry Walker, Brett Warren, Kristen Wissey, and the 1988 girls cross-country team, which was our first state champion in school history. So congratulations to all of them, and we look forward to honoring you on October 16th. And the last item, 7.05, is a review of our joint student and staff services committee meeting that we had prior to this meeting.
Do you want to have that
Oh,
summary?
do you want me to summarize, or is? So we held the meeting to discuss the Title IX regulations and a review of relevant board policies. So we talked about, Title IX and the trainings that we're going to be going through, that the board is going to be going through or is going through, and also all the faculty. We talked about the organization under the new Title IX rules of the different administrators, and the different paths for complaints related to Title IX with respect to sexual harassment, and also other instances like racism and other protected classes that could fall under Title IX policy.
I will follow that up, and maybe it's a good place for it. We maybe didn't get really concrete on next steps and dates. Do we see another staff services, student services committee, in the next quarter, or does this all come back just in reading of the policies, and we'll do this all through the main meeting?
Well, I think what I mentioned in the meeting is, I don't know if a separate committee meeting, I would see us bringing it forward in board meetings for information and discussion. And then once we get it to a place where we think it can move to action, first read, we'll do it. But I think we can do it at these meetings, not a separate one. So that would be our thinking. We're open to committee meetings if needed, but otherwise I think having it in the public discussion would be good. And just to reinforce what Dr. Campbell said, 103 is about non-discrimination in school and classroom practices. That's a pretty broad umbrella around a number of areas. And so the opportunity in front of us is really significant. And so I think this is worthy of a lot of good time, attention, and then public discussion as well.
Do we have any update on our meetings with the Anti-Racism Coalition? Anything that we want to put forth on how that's going or next steps there at this time?
Continuing to work with the families, and so we have been holding weekly meetings essentially, and there's a core team of both administrators here in the district as well as family leaders from the Anti-Racism Coalition. We've been reaching out to university partners, so Dr. Kinlock, Dr. Milner are some of the folks from the University of Pittsburgh and Vanderbilt respectively who have been informing our discussions. We have some initial things planned, communications we're developing, et cetera, and we plan to continue providing regular progress updates on what we're doing. So the work continues in the background, and we'll be having some more updates for the public soon.
And I appreciate with everything else going on, it's one more important thing in all the other important things that you do on a daily basis. So thank you for keeping up with all the different things you're juggling right now, including that one.
Might have made a suggestion, just student services in general, that 701, 702, and 703 be put on a consent agenda for the next meeting, if anyone doesn't object. And if something comes out, I know there's going to be some organization list and whatnot. If something draws the ire that we need to pull it out, we can always do that. But
I'm fine with that.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Dr. Mihalik, Staff Services.
Thanks. Item 8.01 is an information item that there will be personnel and supplemental items at the regular October meeting. Item 8.02 is an information item. Also at the regular October meeting, there'll be a motion to approve the affiliation agreement with the nursing program at Slippery Rock University. Item 8.03, information item, also to be considered at the regular October meeting, a motion to approve the nurse practicum. And then 8.04 is an information item about policy 918 required for Hants Elementary. I don't know if there's more that you want to share about that this evening.
Policy 918 is our Title I policy that it requires itself to be updated every year. It's updated through a parent engagement meeting that takes place at Hants Elementary School to get feedback from the community regarding policy, and it's occurred, so it's on the agenda for approval at the next meeting.
Is it appropriate to suggest items 801 through 804 be on a consent agenda as well?
That is a great suggestion, Dr. Mihalik. Ms. Williams? Awesome.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Moy.
Sure. Item 9.01 is a demographic and redistricting update, and I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Justice.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So Mr. Stobner is going to bring up a slideshow, and just as we did earlier in the meeting where we gave the educational model update, we're going to be recording this portion of the meeting to create a podcast to share out with our community tomorrow. So as he's gathering those slides, hopefully, I know he went back to his office and was pulling up. Oh, they're over on the other side. Sorry. There we go. So in terms of the demographic study, you know that for the last year we've been working on that. So 2019, 2020, that was a key strategic initiative. And so this work is not something that we are moving swiftly and without thought. It is exactly the opposite. It is a deliberate, intentional process. The actual process itself is mapped out later in the presentation, so you'll see exactly where we've been and where we're headed. But on the next slide, Mr. Stovener, you can actually see the outline. So what we had been discussing was that we would update our demographic study. We need to, as a district, maintain a pulse on where our enrollment is headed and have enough foresight to be able to plan and intentionally shape the way our programs are delivered so that they are equitable across our buildings. So with that foresight in mind, we were able to understand where our district is headed and develop 10-year projections, and then look at building capacity and so forth to understand, the story of our district. And so this year, our focus is to take a look at the scenarios that are developed, and this evening we'll be sharing 2 scenarios with you as a part of this presentation. The dialogue around those will be on October 19th at a dedicated committee meeting where we can really delve into what that means and the implications under each of those 2 scenarios. And then finally, this will remain a key strategic initiative as we enter into next year, 21-22, as we will be working on making sure the transitions and the implementation of those developed plans are as smooth as possible. So if we go to the next slide, looking at the background of our district, it's not something that you would think. However, our steady enrollment across K-12 is something that we're seeing. So it has not been projected to increase in a drastic form. However, we're seeing movement within our population. So within the Wexford catchment area, what we do know is our enrollment is increasing drastically due to a lot of move in and so the in-migration numbers are up, the new construction that is there that is being filled out, where we have folks who are aging in place essentially and not selling their homes, and they enjoy our communities are staying here on the opposite side. So in essence, what we've seen is the shift of our population from what had been a larger population in Richland now over in Pine, so this east to west shift. In terms of our capacity, like we mentioned, we want to make sure that we're delivering our programs in the spaces that they're designed for. So all of that leads into looking in the next slide, kind of what I just discussed, the story of seeing where our population is most dense. And you can see that there are concentrated areas in the bottom right corner of this image. You can see kind of the Grandview area, and where we have some denser populations within our community and some of those planned neighborhoods that are producing a lot of our students as well. But this is, looking at overall population density. So on the next slide, you can see where we actually took a look at those 10-year projections to see where our enrollment would be. The year that we want to keep an eye on and that I'm using to compare our everything to in terms of these models is 23-24, where we see the peak enrollment within the district. So as you're thinking through the models where we're projected to be, if we were to continue on the path that we are in, the number of sections that we would need to have in Wexford to accommodate that population would exceed the facility's capacity to hold those sections, and most certainly would impact our programs. So the time to act is now to next year be able to shift our student populations around. And you'll note that while we had this process underway starting last year, we took an intentional pause knowing that we had a global pandemic in the background, and we needed to focus on reopening schools and helping families become adjusted to the new routines that we were in. And now we are resurfacing this topic so that we are able to maintain our planning and our careful thought so that we don't end up in a position where we're unable to deliver programs as intended. So on the next slide, you will see the facility capacity and the current utilization. So we have our largest facility as Richland, and it's not currently weighted. If you look at Wexford's facility space and how it's currently being utilized, we're not optimizing the space that we have, and our population will continue to grow there. The ideal is not to have all of your buildings at 100%. We need to have room to grow into them and to understand what that will look like. So even within the design of the scenarios, within the first year of our redistricting, that is not going to have us sitting exactly where we will be come 2024, when we will be at that peak, if you will. So an example of that would be straight across from this campus, we have Laurel Grove, a new plan that is just beginning to become populated, and there are plenty more homes and spaces residentially that are on the books for there. So walking through this process, we wanted to make sure that before we got to this point where we were even introducing the concept of scenarios, that we had all developed a common philosophy. So in times across our committee meetings in the past, we looked at those criteria. So on the next slide, you'll note the criteria that we had determined were important to us. And so what could we consider and what should we share with the demographers as considerations while they were developing the scenarios that we were able to put forward. So obviously, we want to do this with the 10-year projections in mind. We don't want to be coming back to this fewer than 5 years away. We would hope that this would last further into the future, and every indication of the enrollment projections we have now are certainly leaning that way. We want to understand, you know, where we have neighborhoods that we could possibly reunify. You will see an example of that tonight. We mentioned Grandview just a few moments ago. That is an example where we are able to actually utilize this to reunify some areas. And the most important part on this slide is that we did not want to introduce more scenarios than were necessary. They needed to be based upon these criteria, and we don't find it beneficial or healthy to pit scenarios against one another, neighborhoods essentially against one another, where it's not a viable option that actually gets us to a place where the enrollment is optimized across time. So we took all of that into consideration, and so developing those criteria prior to engaging the process, which is on the next slide, of really developing those scenarios is where we wanted to be. So you can see here that the work really began understanding what the capacity and the studies looked like, moving through the geocoding process, knowing exactly which students are coming from which homes and which neighborhoods. We have beautiful maps to share with you that have all of that information kind of captured on it. And then we were able to start working on those scenarios with the demographers over the summer, and now finally here tonight, just introducing preliminarily the two scenarios that we'll be looking at. So what we would be asking is then to come back, like I said, the committee meeting on October 19th, we would be talking about this, also potentially holding a virtual town hall on November 4th, and then asking for board action this fall so that we could begin that planning process as we get into the winter and through the remainder of this school year into next year. So on the next slide, you'll note just kind of a look-fors, if you will, and we'll take a moment to toggle between the current map of the district as well as the scenarios and what they look like. But within the two scenarios, we're calling them A and B. There is no notation of which one is preferred in A or B. These are just simply two scenarios. You'll note that there are differences among them, and these will be things we'll consider when we come together on the 19th. So in scenario A, as we'll see, the northwest region of Wexford becomes Richland. So this, again, when we have the visual, become a little clearer. Grandview, as I mentioned, is reunified. That does happen in both scenarios. We have a smoothing of the boundary in both scenarios between Richland and Hants, and that was, there's a line you'll see kind of arbitrarily drawn in the past, which is our current boundaries we use since 2012, that we were able to, there really weren't students in those zones, but we were able to make that line make a little more sense in terms of where it is drawn, and then also looking at what the Wexford and Hants boundaries do in each of them. So the biggest differences between the two models are bullet points 1 and 4 under each A and B scenarios. So in the B scenario, that northwest region remains the Wexford zone, and you'll notice that the boundaries between Wexford and Hants do shift slightly west. So we'll go ahead and look at the actual boundaries on the of what that looks like since 2012. And so just kind of take a moment and capture in your mind that Wexford is running north-south, if you will, in the orangish color. Hants, you'll see in the bottom right there in the pink, and Richland in the green. And it's certainly the largest area within this map, but you'll notice kind of the jagged boundary between Richland and Hants that I was referring to, and somewhat of like a finger pointing down, if you will, if you use your imagination, kind of on the line there where Grubbs Road is. And so thinking through, you know, why that was there aren't students actually within that zone, so being able to smooth some of those things out makes a little bit more sense. So with that being said, let's look at scenario A. So you'll notice, again, most evident here is that Richland is now running more east to west, and what was the north-south kind of parameter of Wexford has now stopped running so far north, and that boundary is maintained between Wexford and Hants as it is. again, you'll notice that over on the far side of Hants, that the Grandview plan, which was previously, that line had been a little bit lower further south, where there was actually some of Grandview attending Richland and some of Grandview attending Hants. This will provide that neighborhood with, again, unity and the sense of neighbors being bused together. It's come up over the years with folks who are trying to transport children and relying on neighbors, et cetera, that requests happen that way. You'll also notice things like in the Wexford area that the line has dropped a little bit further south as well, even as you get to the further east portion of the Wexford zone. So there are certain plans within the district that have very high levels of students, particularly in K3. So all of that, we can get into those details on the 19th, but you'll note some of those differences. So looking at what that means in terms of the enrollment projections, we have a map of the numbers on the next slide that indicate where enrollment is. And as I mentioned, 2024 is the number that we want to be looking at to see where that peak hits, and then what that means in terms of number of sections on an average basis, as well as the ability for the building, the facility to absorb those and actually house them in a good way. So you can see it's broken down for Hants, Richland, and Wexford. We'll give you time, obviously, to take that in, but we've done things, again, in the background so that we can discuss on the 19th what that does to the loadings of the buildings, et cetera. So that's just to give you a sense of what that would look like. Now, to refresh your memory on the current boundaries, we inserted that slide one more time so that you can get that visual in your mind. So again, we're looking at Wexford being north-south currently. You're going to notice that in the next version, in scenario B, it maintains that north-south, and instead we're actually looking at taking what is the eastern Wexford boundary and pushing it further west. So Hants ends up taking up a little bit more of that space, and you do notice a little bit of a shift in the northeastern region of Wexford. There's a slight bend in that line where then that becomes Richland. Again, with Richland being the most populated school, the idea here is we need to shift students. And so that is Wexford to Richland, Wexford to Hants, Wexford to Richland, but then that makes Richland go to Hants. So there's multiple pieces of impact based on this. So, okay, take that in your mind again. And then we'll move to that scenario B. And you can see that Grandview is, again, reunified with that boundary line pushing a little further north. You can also see that what I just described between Wexford and Hants, where the boundary has now shifted further west, and we do see a larger portion on what is the western side of Richland in this that has become a part of that new zone. So then on the next slide, you can see, again, enrollment projections. So the one piece that's important to remember here, as this column is called current and it says 2019, what the demographers actually did was back map what those numbers would have looked like in that year given that enrollment based on this scenario. So that is not what it looked like in 2019. You'd want to go back up to the chart above where we actually had the current enrollment and then the projections off the 10-year study. So these are things that we want to at least get in your minds for consideration, knowing that we have an important meeting and some important decisions obviously ahead of us. But this would be a first glance at what those two scenarios would be. So in terms of timeline, if you look, what I verbalized in the beginning is on the next slide, where we indicate that we'll be summarizing this meeting, obviously, and sending this out as a podcast, so that if anybody was unable to attend this meeting virtually and they need an update, they will have that. We'll have our committee meeting, the potential virtual town hall, and continued discussion with further updates to the community in between, and then requesting board on November 16th would be the board action that we're requesting. And as we say this and we share this, we're not taking it lightly. We know that now that we've said here are two scenarios, there are people who are hearing this, seeing this, and thinking, that's me, that's my students, et cetera. Please bear in mind that we will do this with as much intention as possible and really plan the transition for those students and really make sure that they are ushered into and supported throughout what's happening. So we did this intentionally so that we would have time and the ability to speak with the students to help understand what it'll look like as they are acclimated at a new building. So we have some ideas listed here, but that is not an exhaustive list. We have many more concepts that we would put in place to do that. So we will continue updating the website. If you've not yet taken a look at that and either you're new to us, your child maybe is just starting school and you missed the beginning of it, you can go back to that website and it's an archive of podcasts, communications, etc. But we wanted to at least give the community an update on that, share these scenarios with the board, and then look forward to the dialogue later this month.
Awesome. Cool.
Any questions or comments?
I just wanted to acknowledge that this has a very emotional impact on some families who are very attached to their schools, and the board recognizes that. We understand that, and we want to assure you that all three of our elementary schools are outstanding. We've visited all of them. They all have wonderful faculty, wonderful resources, and we will do our best, for the students that do get transitioned to a new school. I know there's a lot of change this year, and this is just one more on top of that that's going to make it that much harder. But your children will enjoy their new school. We'll help them adapt, and we'll do our best to make sure it's a smooth transition for your family.
Have all the busing scenarios kind of been mapped at all? When I look at the numbers, scenario A seems to make the most sense. When I look at the map, B seems to be the least disruptive, at least just looking at it from a busing standpoint. And I know one of the things that we try to do is keep the busing under a certain time frame. And when we divide by A, if you will, it looks like some of those trips to Richland could get lengthy. And I just don't know if those have been ran, those scenarios, anything like that.
We have not put them into the mapping software. That would be a little premature, but I think that just given the footprint of our school district, there aren't concerns of a bus ride taking over a certain amount of time. Like, we would make sure we looked at what that looked like, so that if a bus were leaving Richland, let's say in scenario A, and going to the furthest northwest corner, they might have students only from that neighborhood, so there aren't like places to stop on the way. So you're talking 10 minutes, something like that. It's not so far, but
So I would
point
add,
taken.
we transport to Eden Hall, right? So
Everybody,
Eden Hall
yeah.
and Richland are right there.
Right.
It's a reason. All of our bus lanes are reasonable. It's no different. I would point also though to criteria. So when we narrowed on the criteria, we would look at things like transportation, but we wouldn't necessarily use that as a discerning criteria. The bigger numbers, if you can, is Sean driving that? Sean, if you could go to scenario B, the data projection. Yeah, that's fine. And so when people have time and can, I'm sure we'll have it's nice to be able to toggle back and forth and look at all these and be able to give it a few minutes of thought. But this is a critical slide for both, which is what projects based on the new boundaries. And so, again, looking at Hans is in the top, seeing where that enrollment projects across the timeline, because the only thing worse or more challenging than the toughest is school closure. The next is redistricting. But after redistricting is needing to redistrict again. So we want to try to select a choice that provides the greatest amount of time. And in this one, you see where in both A and B, you'll see where all three enrollment projections are. But transportation, we feel really good about. The transportation software that is being used, even right now, STA was able to increase the number of buses supporting Wexford, decrease the number of buses supporting Hans. So as Hans's enrollment has gone down, those bus resources get shifted over to be used at Wexford. So I think we can make all of that work.
One question I have on this that we might need to go to the demographers for. I know their last study was pretty much spot on, right? Like the numbers tracked really well. I'm just wondering if we have any kind of error bars on these projections so we know, what range we might be looking at, because these are targets, but we don't know small error bars, big error bars. We just know last time they did a really good job of hitting the nail on the head, right?
So yes, you're right. That was a very accurate last study, and they have statistical projections and things that are in place. So this is based on those growth ratios and all sorts of, we're looking at birth statistics, move-in statistics, number of students produced out of certain types of homes. It's a science by every sense. So, and then we have the art of understanding how that story came to fruition in our actual community. So these are their best pieces of thinking. They do have a full report with many more details than is shared here that we will be posting on our website as well. So that will have some of that insight, but they don't necessarily provide, an error bar.
Yeah, the other reality to the art side is, use COVID as an example, or use a recession as an example, or lost jobs. Those are all things that impact, or cyber charter. All of those things impact educational choice decisions. Sometimes consolidation of schools brings students back to the public environment. Sometimes, there's a lot of moving parts. So the level of sophistication with Davis demographics is nothing short of stunning. We have really been pleased with their work. The combination of Thomas and Williamson and Davis has really been good to work with. The ability to, again, Sean, can you go back to the heat map? We've talked about this before, but in looking at where the population density exists within the district, this is so helpful because you can move a lot of things and not move children. And when it comes to redistricting, you have to find the places where families and children are in order to make the meaningful impact. So having this kind of technology to really look at what is viable is just huge. And as Dr. Justice mentioned, looking at a space like Laurel Grove as an example, there are hundreds of units to still go in, which will produce children, and you'll see that in the reports. But that's an example of why Richland Elementary, we would want to leave some capacity for growth within that space to account for something like Laurel Grove. So again, it'll be great to get into more detail, but really some nice tools that just didn't exist before that are so helpful now.
I just have a quick question. I'm sure we'll discuss more on the next meeting, but I just would like to find out what will be the process of making the decision between the scenarios, because I know that we are very good at processes and making those plans, models for decisions, but will that be more like community-based decision, some kind of like survey or voting, or this will be based on the number of students that need to be transitioned at the first year of the implementation, or like how do we know which model will
So those
have
criteria that we set that were on the one slide will be the ones we use as our frame to make the decision. So we will be, and that has been informed by our stakeholders. So we will be engaging in dialogue around that at the committee meeting to understand it. But ultimately, we will hopefully have a recommendation to put forth to say, based on the metrics, based on these criteria, this seems to make the most sense. Now let's talk about that. And then obviously that virtual town hall that we will potentially be holding on the 4th of November, that'll be another point to hear the community, but it isn't simply like a vote from the masses. It is what a well-reasoned decision based on our criteria strategically makes sense for the district going into the future to allow us to get that 5 years at least, hopefully more, longevity of our educational programming being delivered with fidelity.
Yeah, I would say it this way. We've now provided more detailed information. People will be hungry to look at it. We'll listen to the feedback that we receive. It isn't a question of to redistrict or not to redistrict. It's exactly how. We'll own the recommendation. And then what Mr. DiTullio often talks about is this DECIDE acronym. Ultimately, after all of that input and discussion, there's action to take. And it's really grounding that action in the criteria in order to make that decision. So Again, a lot of positive comments that we've talked about over the years, and Dr. Campbell just said it best. Number one, kids are resilient. So at the end of the day, children adapt well. All three schools are excellent. That is something that we have the privilege to be able to say. And then it comes down to the teacher. And what happens is, in my experience, children get to know their new teacher, and they realize their new teacher loves them, and they love their new teacher, and it's magical, and within moments of that relationship forming, things begin to get better. And so part of the timeline that Dr. Justice mentioned is the ability to, once a decision is made, engage students and families in transition experiences so that this is not like a rapid, unexpected move, but instead is a planned, thoughtful, relationship-based, positive experience. And if our children have shown us anything over the last 6-7 months, is that resiliency is incredible. And so again, tough topic. We've had tonight's agenda, is truly, starting with the committee meeting, you cannot have more substantive topics for discussion or review than we've had on the agenda tonight.
Move on to item 9.02. This is just a reminder of the Joint Operational Student Services Committee on October 19th at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Matt. Item 10.01 is simply a reminder of the 2020 PASA PSBA School Leadership Conference. Probably not too late to register since it's virtual this year. Ms. Misbach, you've registered, I know, so thank you, and please provide any links or summaries of useful information this year. Item 11.01, reports. I'm looking back and forth. We'll just leave the Beatty one to either way we want to talk about it. Gosh, that's looking at me.
So the prof had their trustee meeting last Monday, and they actually revised their mission just to add in the every student, so that the Pine-Richland Opportunities Fund is a nonprofit educational foundation committed to investing in the educational experience of every Pine-Richland student through staff grants, student scholarships, and community partnerships. So it just somewhat more closely aligns to our mission, the district's mission. And then they also revised their, or added to their objectives. And all of that on the report is in red, the revisions that they made. And then there were 2 FAST grants, and FAST grants are grants that are approved by the grants committee, the Prof Grants Committee alone. It doesn't have to be the full board, and they're less than $1,000. So there were 2 that were more recently done, the Trout in the Classroom for the AP Environmental Science curriculum, and then the elementary music kits. And I don't know if you want to speak to either of those at all, Dr. Justice, if you know.
I can speak to the elementary music kits. So I know that the elementary music teachers, actually Dr. Campbell's wife being involved in that as well, put together a proposal to help make music more interactive, but by individual students, so they can have manipulatives that they're able to touch and utilize without it producing other risk factors, I guess, that normally would occur. So it's a way to bring music to life and engage the students. So we really appreciate the support of Prof in that, for sure.
And then the Trout in the Classroom. Did you want to say anything, Dr. Pasquinelli, or?
Oh, sorry.
For the Trout in the Classroom? For the AP.
I'd like to say it's always nice to have Trout in the classroom. Yeah. Yeah, but
Right.
yeah, again, just as always, Prof is super supportive of everything that we try to do and new initiatives, so yeah, we appreciate that.
Okay, great. And that's it for Prof.
Thanks, Christine. I will mention here, this weekend, the AIU Board of Directors is having their fall workshop. We have a new director, Dr. Bob Shear. So part of it's to go through that process with him. It is simply essential at a place as big as the IU that we hold these workshops. We spend probably half our time each year just getting to know the scope of services and programs and understanding the various lines, because it is actually a very different type organization than our local school districts. This year, fortunately as well, we are beginning to, we'll say, plan for the strategic plan, which is, I'll say it's old enough that we debate the actual date of the previous strategic plan. That's a good sign. You know you need a new strategic plan, and that's not even clear still. So we'll talk about the process a bit this weekend, as well as doing our general overview of AIU programs. Second, recognition of visitors. Ms. Williams, do we have anyone in the waiting room?
We do have one person. When Mr. Stobener had reached out earlier, he didn't have any luck, but we'll give it a try. Miss Aquiana.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh. Hello?
No answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Our email address is always out there, so we hope to hear from you all.
Hey, Peter, we should mention today is World Teachers Day, so thank you to all our teachers.
Thank you for noting that, Ben. Thank you. Any other reports from board members? We'll adjourn then. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.